Chapter 5. Later on the first day, there was a commotion in the West End. At 803 Oriole Street, to be exact. At the backyard of 803 Oriole Street, to be exacter. This, of course, was the infamous address of Finsterwald. Kids stayed away from Finsterwalds the way old people stay away from Saturday afternoon matinees at a $2 movie. And what would happen to a kid who didn't stay away? That was a question best left unanswered. Suffice it to say that occasionally, even today, if some poor, raggedy, nicotine-stained wretch is shuffling through town, word will spread that this once was a bright, happy, normal child who had the misfortune of blundering into Finsterwald's property. That's why, if you valued your life, you never chased a ball into Finsterwald's backyard. Finsterwald's backyard was a graveyard of tennis balls and baseballs and footballs and frisbees and model airplanes and one-way boomerangs. That's why his front steps were the only unsat-on front steps in town. And why no paper kid would ever deliver there. And why no kid on a snow day would ever shovel that sidewalk, not for $1 zillion. So, it was late afternoon and screams were coming from Finsterwald's. Who, what, why? The screamer was a boy whose name is lost to us, for after this day he disappears from the pages of history. We believe he was about 10 years old. Let's call him Arnold Jones. Arnold Jones was being hoisted in the air above Finsterwald's backyard fence. The hoisters were 3 or 4 high school kids. This was one of the things they did for fun. Arnold Jones had apparently forgotten one of the cardinal rules of survival in the West End. Never let yourself be near Finsterwalds and high schoolers at the same time. So there's Arnold Jones held up by these hands, flopping and kicking and shrieking like some poor Aztec human sacrifice about to be tossed off a pyramid. No, please, 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 please. So of course they do it. The high schoolers dump him into the yard. And now they back off, no longer laughing, just watching the back door of the house, the windows, the dark green shades. As for Arnold Jones, he clams up the instant he hits the ground. He's on his knees now, all hunched and puckered. His eyes goggle to the back door. At the doorknob, he's paralyzed, a mouse in front of the yawning maw of a python. Now, after a minute or two of breathless silence, one of the high schoolers thinks he hears something. He whispers, "Listen." Another one hears it, a faint, tiny noise, a rattling, a chittering, a chattering. And getting louder, yes, chattering teeth. Arnold Jones's teeth. They're chattering like snare drums, and now, as if his mouth isn't big enough to hold the chatter, the rest of his body joins in. It's a buzz-like trembling, then the shakes, and finally, as if every bone inside of him is clamoring to get out, a high schooler squeaks, "He's got the Finsterwallies!" Yeah, they yell, and they stand there cheering and clapping. Years later, the high schoolers' accounts differ. One says the kid from nowhere hopped the fence, hopped it without ever laying a hand on it to boost himself over. Another said the kid just opened the back gate and strolled on in. Another swears it was a mirage, some sort of hallucination, possibly caused by evil emanations surrounding 803 Oriole Street. Real or not, they saw the same kid. Not much bigger than Arnold Jones, raggedy, flap-soled sneakers, book in one hand. They saw him walk right up to Arnold, and they saw Arnold look at him and faint dead away. Such a bad case of the Finsterwallies did Arnold have that his body kept shaking for half a minute after he conked out. The phantom Samaritan stuck the book between his teeth, crouched down, hoisted Arnold Jones' limp carcass over his shoulder, hauled him out of there like a sack of flour. Unfortunately, he chose to put Arnold down at the one spot in town as bad as Finsterwally's backyard, namely Finsterwald's front steps. When Arnold came to and discovered this, he took off like a horsefly from a swatter. As the stupefied high schoolers were leaving the scene, they looked back. They saw the kid, cool times 10, stretched out on the forbidden steps and open his book to read. Chapter 6. About an hour later, Mrs. Valerie Pinkwell twanged open her back screen door, stood on the step, and whistled. As whistles go, Miss Pinkwell's was one of all-time greats. It reeled in every Pinkwell kid for dinner every night. Never was a Pinkwell kid ever late for dinner. It was a record that will probably stand forever. The whistle wasn't loud, it wasn't screechy, it was a simple 2-note jab, one high, one low. To an outsider, it wouldn't even sound all that special, but to the ears of a Pinkwell kid, it was magic. Somehow, it had the ability to slip through the slush of 5 o'clock noises to reach its targets. So, from the dump, from the creek, from the tracks, from Red Hill, it ran the Pinkwell kids for dinner, all 10 of them. Add to that the parents, Baby Diddy, grandmother and grandfather Pinkwell, great-grandfather Pinkwell, and the down-and-out taxi driver whom Mr. Pinkwell was helping out. The Pinkwells were always helping somebody out. All that, and you had what Miss Pinkwell called her small nation. Only a ping-pong table was big enough to seat them. All that, and that's what they ate around. Dinner was spaghetti. In fact, every third night dinner was spaghetti. When dinner was over and they were all bringing their dirty dishes to the kitchen, Dominic Pinkwell said to Duke Pickwell, "Who's that kid?" "What kid?" said Duke. "The kid next to you at the table." "I don't know. I thought Donald knew him." "I don't know him," said Donald. "I thought Dion knew him." "Never saw him," said Dion. "I figured he was Deirdre's new boyfriend." Deirdre kicked Dion in the shins. Duke checked back in the dining table. "He's gone." The Pinkwell kids dashed out of the back door to the top of Rico Hill. They scanned the railroad tracks. There he was, passing Red Hill, a book in his hand. He was running, passing the Spear Field now, and the Pinkwell kids had to blink and squint and shade their eyes to make sure they were seeing things right, because the kid wasn't running the cinders alongside the track or the wooden ties. No, he was running, where the Pinkwells themselves, where every other kid had only ever walked, on the rail itself. Chapter 7. When Jeffrey McGee was next spotted, it was at the Little League field in the park. A Little League game had just ended. The Red Sox had won, but the big story was John McNabb, who struck out 16 batters to set a new 2 Mills LL record. McNabb was a giant. He stood 5 feet 8 and was said to weigh over 170 pounds. He had to bring his birth certificate in to the league director to prove he was only 12, and still most people didn't believe it. The point is, the rest of the league was no match for McNabb. It wouldn't have been so bad if he had been a right fielder, but he was pitcher. There was only one pitch he ever threw, a fastball. Most of the batters never saw it, they just heard it whiz past their noses. You could see their knees shaking from the stands. One poor kid stood there long enough to hear strike one go past, then threw up all over home plate. It was still pretty loud out, because when there are a lot of strikeouts, a game goes fast. And McNabb was still on the mound, even though the official game was over. He figured he'd made baseball history, and he wanted to stretch it out as long as he could. There were still about 10 players around, Red Soxers and Green Soxers, and McNabb was making them march up to the plate and take their swings. There was no catcher. The ball just zoomed to the backstop. When a kid struck out, he went to the back of the line. McNabb was loving it. After each whiff, he laughed and bellowed a strikeout total. 26, 27, 28. He was like a shark. He had the bloodlust. The victims were hunched and trembling, walking the gangplank. 34, 35. Then somebody new stepped up to the plate. Just a punky, runty little kid. No Red Sox or Green Sox uniform. Kinda scraggly, with a book, which he laid on home plate. He stretched out a footing in the batter's box, cocked the bat on his shoulder, and stared at McNabb. McNabb croaked from the mound. "Get out of here, runt. This is a Little League record. You ain't in Little League." The kid walked away. Was he chickening out? Nope. He lifted a red cap from the next batter in line. He put it on. He was back in the box. McNabb almost fell off the mound. He was laughing so hard. "Okay, runt number 36 coming up." McNabb fired. The kid swung. The batter in line automatically turned their head to the backstop, where the ball should be, but it wasn't there. It was in the air, riding on a beeline right out to McNabb's head. The same line it came in on, only faster. McNabb froze, then flinched just in time. The ball missed his head, but nipped the bill of his cap and sent it spinning like a flying saucer out to shortstop. The ball landed in the second base dust and rolled all the way to the fence in center field. Dead silence. Nobody moved. McNabb was gaping at the kid, who was still standing there, all calm and cool, waiting for the next pitch. Finally, a sort of grin slithered across McNabb's lips. He roared, "Get my hat, get my ball." 10 kids scrambled into the field, bringing him the bat and the ball. McNabb had it figured out. He was so busy laughing at the runt, he lobbed him a lollipop, and the runt got lucky. This time, McNabb wasn't laughing. He fingered the ball, tips digging into the red stitching. He wound, he fired, he thought, "Man, that sucker's going so fast, even I can hardly see it." And then he was looking up, turning, following the flight of the ball, which finally came down to earth in deep left center field and bounced once to the fence. More silent, except for someone who yelled, "Yep," then caught himself. "Ball," bellowed McNabb. He was handed the ball. He slammed his hat to the ground. His nostrils flared. He was breathing like a picadored bull. He windmilled, reared, lunged, fired. This time the ball cleared the fence on a fly. No more holding back. The kids cheered. Somebody ran for the ball. They were anxious now for more. 3 more pitches, 3 more home runs. Pandemonium on the sidelines. It was raining red and green. McNabb couldn't stand it. The next time he threw it was straight at the kid's head. The kid ducked. McNabb called strike 1. Next pitch headed for the kid's belt. The kid bent his stomach around the ball. Strike 2. Strike 3 took dead aim at the kid's knees. And here was the kid swooping back at the same time, swatting at the ball like a golfer teeing off. It was the craziest baseball swing you ever saw. There was the ball, smoking out to center field. "Hold it, runt. I can't pitch right when I got a whiz." The kids on the sideline made way as McNabb stomped off the field, past the dugout and into the woods between the field and the creek. They waited a pretty long time, but they figured, well, McNabb's whiz probably took longer than everyone else's. Might even make the creek rise. At last McNabb was back on the mound, fingering the ball in his glove, a demon's gleam in his eye. He wound up, fired. The ball headed for the plate, and what's this, a leg ball? It's got legs. Long legs, pinwheeling toward the plate. It wasn't a ball at all. It was a frog, and McNabb was on the mound cackling away, and the kids at the plate was bug-eyed. He'd never seen it. Nobody ever tried to hit a fast frog before. So what did the kid do? He bunted it. He bunted the frog, laid the perfect bunt in front of the plate, third base side, and he took off for first. He was halfway to second before McNabb jolted himself into action. The kid was trying for an inside-the-park home run bunt, the rarest feat in baseball, something that hardly ever been done with a ball and never with a frog. And he would be the pitcher who let such a thing happen. Well, McNabb could hardly feel his strikeout record fading already to a mere grain in the sandlot of history. So he lumbered off the mound after the frog, which was now hopping down the third base line. As a matter of fact, it was so close to the line that McNabb had a brilliant idea. Just heard the frog cross the line, and it would be a foul ball, which is what he tried to do with his foot, but the frog, instead of taking a left, jumped over his shoe and hopped on toward third base. He was heading for the green fields of left, and the runt kid, sounding like two runners with his flap-flap shoes, was chucking dust for third. Only one hope now. McNabb had to grab the frog and tag the runner out. But now the frog shot through his legs, over to the mound, and now toward shortstop, and now toward second. McNabb was lurching and lunging, throwing his hat at the frog, throwing his glove, and everybody was screaming. The kid was rounding third and dinging for home, and unbefroggable. The ball was heading back home too. The ball, the batter, the pitcher, all racing for home plate. And it was the batter, the new kid out of nowhere, who crossed the plate first, at the same time scooping up his book, twirling his borrowed red cap back to the cheering others, and jogging on past empty stands up the hill to the boulevard. McNabb gasping, croaking after him, "Don't stop till you're out of town, runt. Don't ever let me catch you." And that's how Jeffrey Magee knocked the world's first frog ball for a four-bagger. And how he became called Maniac. The town was buzzing, the schools were buzzing, hallways, lunchroom, streets, playground, west end, east end, buzzing about this new kid in town, the stranger kid, scraggly, carrying a book, flaps old sneakers, the kid who intercepted Brian Dennehy's pass to hands down and punted it back longer than Dennehy himself ever threw it, and the kid who rescued Arnold Jones from Finsterwald's backyard, the kid who tattooed giant John McNabb's fastball for half a dozen home runs, then circled the stacks on a bunted frog. Nobody knew who said it first, but somebody must have. This kid's gotta be a maniac. And somebody else must have said, yeah, regular maniac. And somebody else, yeah. And that was that. Nobody except Amanda Beale had any other name for him. So pretty soon, when they wanted to talk about the new kid, that's what they called him. Maniac. The legend had a name, but not an address. At least not an official one with numbers. What he did have was the deer shed at Elmwood Park Zoo, which is where he slept his first few nights in town. What the deer ate, especially the carrots, apples, and day-old hamburger buns, he ate. He started reading Amanda Beale's book his second day in town and finished it that afternoon. Ordinarily, he would have returned it immediately, but he was so fascinated by the story that he kept it and read it the next day and the next. When he wasn't reading, he was wandering. When most people wander, they walk. Maniac Magee ran around town, around the nearby townships, always carrying the book, keeping it in perfect condition. And this is what he was doing when his life, as it often seemed to do, took an unexpected turn.